There's a theory about Call of Duty Black Ops. A theory so wild, so strange that you think it's wrong. But the more evidence you see, the more you realize this theory is actually probably right. So let's dive into the mountain of evidence to support that Viktor Reznov was probably evil and the Soviet Union designed the entire Black Ops story without anyone ever knowing. So let's start off with one indisputable fact that you cannot change. The original Call of Duty Black Ops game is the most historically accurate and meticulously designed Call of Duty game of all time. The events that happen in game are accurate to the day and almost to the exact hour they take place in real life. The game was so realistic, Call of Duty used declassified CIA documents as marketing for the game. The numbers codes in-game can still be solved and decoded to this day. The developers over-designed the game. But they got one thing wrong. One thing so wrong that when you look at it in perspective of all that information I just gave you, it makes you question Black Ops as a whole. If the game is so historically accurate, so meticulously designed, why is Vorkuta wrong? Alex Mason escapes Vorkuta alongside Viktor Reznov in 1963. That's what happens in the game. But we know from real life, and the Vorkuta book that was actually used to help design Vorkuta for the Call of Duty Black Ops game, that Vorkuta was closed by 1962. In 1957, millions of prisoners were let free from the Soviet Union as gulags were condemned and they decided to close them all down. By 1960, all the major gulags were closed and there were very few people left in Vorkuta. And one of the other things the book tells us is that Vorkuta had one of the highest death rates of any Soviet Union gulag. 28,000 people a year died in the gulag. There was very little food, no warmth, backbreaking labor, and yet somehow, throughout all of this, Viktor Reznov survived in Vorkuta and was never let out, even after the facility closed. So, okay, maybe they just stretched the truth on Vorkuta a little bit. You know, just one thing in the game that they completely made up and stretched the truth on and changed the dates for. The only thing, right? That's probably just one-off thing. Well, hold on a second. Because what was the point of Alex Mason's brainwashing? Alex Mason was specifically designed and brainwashed because he was a CIA asset and they wanted to implant the numbers code into his head because he could travel around the United States and they could eventually get him to kill the president of the United States, which was JFK at the time, whenever they wanted by activating the numbers sequence. But they literally discuss over top of his body that he has a strong will and they couldn't get the number sequence to work, despite lots of scientists and drugs and all the power and the money that the Soviet Union had at the time. They couldn't get him to be brainwashed. So they send him to the Vorkuta Gulag, where he meets Viktor Reznov, who supposedly has been there for 18 years. And Viktor Reznov reverses the brainwashing done to Alex Mason and instead plants his own number sequence into Alex Mason's head without him ever knowing. And so basically, Viktor Reznov did it in a cave with a box of scraps.
Mark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps!
Now, this doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. First of all, if you had failed to brainwash an American, why wouldn't you just kill him? If the brainwashing failed, just get rid of the evidence and no one would ever know. Why would you throw him in the gulag? Second, why would he, in the gulag, run into the one person who's smart enough and has enough of a good revenge backstory to drive him to change the brainwashing in his brain and get his own purposes achieved? It doesn't make sense unless Alex Mason was always supposed to escape from Vorkuta. Now, the game tells us that Alex Mason killed JFK. Nikita Dragovich basically confirms it in the last level of the campaign, and on top of that, the very last cutscene we're shown in the game is Dallas the same day JFK was there, and Alex Mason is in the background of all the videos and photographs. So, the game basically tells us Alex Mason killed JFK. But hold on, wait a second, that can't be true, because Nikita Dragovich and Frederick Steiner said that the brainwashing failed over top of Alex Mason's body while he was half conscious.
Is the problem.
His responses to our orders have been sporadic, unpredictable.
You see the problem there? If Alex Mason's brainwashing failed, JFK would have been alive. But it didn't fail, it succeeded because they activated the number sequence and Alex Mason killed JFK. But the only way you could activate the number sequence is if Alex Mason wasn't in Russia and he wasn't in the Vorkuta Gulag. So he'd have to leave Russia. But you couldn't just let him go, because then the CIA would say that he's unacceptable for field work and they would never trust him. He'd have to break out, he'd have to escape on his own terms. That way, no one ever suspected that he was brainwashed, and he himself wouldn't know he was brainwashed. You're starting to see where the theory's coming together now. But, Viktor Reznov, he's kind of a problem for this whole story. Because he tells us this very dramatic story about why he wants revenge, and he implants the 3 names of the people he wants revenge on inside of Alex Mason's head. And Alex Mason's entire goal is to go kill these 3 people. But is the story true? We're basing the entire idea that Viktor Reznov wanted revenge off of a story that Viktor Reznov tells us that cannot be corroborated by anybody else. There is a document from the British intelligence service you can find in-game that says that there was a sinking of the Nova 6 shipment in the Arctic Circle in 1945. So that happened for sure. But everything else that happens, Dmitry Petrenko's death, Viktor Reznov being betrayed by Nikita Dragovich, Frederick Steiner, and Lev Kravchenko. What proof do we have that any of it happened? Well, there is none. We're just taking Viktor Reznov's word for what it is. We're assuming that this is correct. Remember, Viktor Reznov survived Vorkuta for 18 years even after it was shut down. So he either didn't willingly leave or he was kept there intentionally. And despite the food shortages throughout the 50s and 28,000 people dying a year, this dude survived for 18 years? But he's somehow in a position in the gulag where he's smart enough and his body hasn't deteriorated enough, he can lead a revolt and a breakout, and helps reverse brainwashing on Alex Mason. Except there's one massive piece of evidence that changes the story. The photograph. The photograph that Frederick Steiner, Lev Kravchenko, and Nikita Dragovich all have on their command consoles. A photo from 1945 outside the Nova 6 shipment, in which the photo has Dmitry Petrenko, Viktor Reznov, Kravchenko, Dragovich, and Steiner. All 5 people are in the photograph in front of the ship. But there's a massive, just basic problem with this photograph existing. So first of all, it is proof of a massive failure by the Russian government to obtain Nova 6. Second, there's 2 people in the photograph that shouldn't be there then. You have Dmitry Petrenko and you have Viktor Reznov, who supposedly betrayed you. So you're keeping a photo of your greatest military disaster and 2 people you hated, both of whom you tried to kill, and you're just keeping it on your desk as like a warm, fuzzy memory? No, you wouldn't. No one would do this. 3 different people wouldn't have the exact same photograph on all of their desk that was supposedly the greatest failure of their lives. They wouldn't do that unless they had fond memories of the person. So the betrayal never happened. Viktor Reznov tells us this story, tells Alex Mason this story about this betrayal, and implants these 3 names into his head to go kill these people. But we never stopped to ask if the story was real. We never interrogated Viktor Reznov's reason for revenge or his story at all. We just accepted that. We have always just accepted that is the truth. But we know Alex Mason's brainwashing succeeded. He went and killed JFK, so the numbers program succeeded. So why put him in the prison with Viktor Reznov? Unless Viktor Reznov implanted a backup plan. In the case that Alex Mason failed and he was captured, Alex Mason could then point out 3 people who directly link the assassination attempt on JFK to Moscow. By killing Steiner, Dragovich, and Kravchenko, there would be no one who could prove that the Russians were responsible, and thus is a failsafe. Viktor Reznov was working with Nikita Dragovich the entire time. Now remember back to the 1953 breakout from Vorkuta I told you about? Yeah, those same steps were almost followed in order by Call of Duty Black Ops. Viktor Reznov knew the exact steps required to try to break out of Vorkuta, and were able to do so successfully. But the only 2 people who got out of the prison complex were Viktor Reznov and Alex Mason. And Viktor Reznov sacrifices himself to save Alex Mason, and Alex Mason returns to the United States, where he then proceeds to, about a month later, kill JFK. The 3 names implanted in his head by Viktor Reznov were the failsafe in case anything went wrong. Viktor Reznov was always working for the Russians. Nikita Dragovich planned a failsafe in case Alex Mason was caught. And the only way that Alex Mason would be able to kill JFK is if his brainwashing worked and he was out of Vorkuta. And no one would ever question brainwashing on someone who voluntarily broke out of a prison to escape and return back to the United States. No one would ever question that, which is what makes the theory work.